What's up guys, welcome back to the shop. In today's video we're going to be making a knife out of bandsaw blades. So this is going to be my entry for the Apocalypse challenge, and as such it asks for us to be making knives from recycled items. So I'm going to use all these old bandsaw blades that I accumulate throughout the year from using my bandsaws, and I'm going to be using them in a canister. Now first things first, I'm going to be making my canister, and that's just going to be a piece of square tubing with a cap welded onto one side. And here I am welding the cap on. So as this is the Apocalypse challenge, I was thinking I'm going to make a type of machete. I'm not sure what kind of type. Just at the moment I'm thinking machete. Something longish, not too long, not too short. But you definitely want some length to the weapon. That way you don't have to fight close quarters in case, you do have to fight somebody during an apocalypse. While also being a pretty good tool you can use around to, cut branches and other stuff that you would need to survive during an apocalypse world. So here I'm spraying my can with some white spray paint. This is going to help release the billet from the can whenever it's nice and consolidated. And the reason why this helps is because white paint has something called titanium oxide in it, and that titanium oxide is what actually gives the pigment its color, and it does not like to weld, so the titanium keeps the insides from welding to the actual canister. So as long as it's nicely prepped, evenly painted on there, it should give us a nice, good and clean release. So I'm going to be using some steel powder from Maritime Knife Supply, and this steel powder has 2% nickel, and that 2% nickel lets it give contrast to the actual bandsaw blades, which are made of some kind of high carbon. I'm not sure what steel it is, but the addition of the nickel in the steel powder will let it contrast well against those. And we're going to put our cap on and weld it on. Typically I don't like to show all the welding because the light is annoying, so I'm just going to tack all the corners on the canister, and then we're going to jump onto the finished canister. I always like to leave a gap in the actual welding so that my air can go out. Some people like to drill a hole, but I prefer just to do that gap. It does the same thing and lets the gases release. And as always, you're pressing from top to bottom, hopefully not dropping the canister as often, but pressing from top to bottom to help consolidate everything inside that billet. Or actually I meant to say canister, not billet. So now that everything's consolidated, we're going to start hitting it with the flat dies. And what I'm doing here is I'm trying to flatten out where I got all those ripples where I flattened it, and pretty much the billet is already consolidated with the first few presses. So here I'm just going to pop off the cap, and I'm going to slowly work the shell of the canister. That way I can release the actual billet that's on the inside. Now I've been told before that why do I press from top to bottom instead of doing the sides? And the reasoning for that is simple. I saw a video with Steve Schwartzer. You might know him as Master Smith, Steve Schwartzer, and he's a veteran when it comes to canisters. And in the video he explained that he always presses the first press from top to bottom, and he has a special machine press that he uses specifically for that because he likes to put a rebar at the end of the billet so it's easier to hold. So he has a hydraulic press specifically just so that he can use it with that rebar. I just used the canister without the rebar because it's easier for me, but I mean, he has many more years of experience, and since I started using this method, I've had literally no issues with the ends of my billets not consolidating correctly. So I mean, he has way more experience than I do, and if he says do it and it works, then don't fix what's not broken. So that's why I do it, and I often get comments saying that, well, it's not good to do it that way, but I'll stick to doing it this way because that's how I get consistent and good results. But if you don't want to do it that way, be my guest, do it however you want to do it. So here, as you saw, I removed the billet pretty cleanly, and now I'm just working it down. Now I could probably get away with making the machete out of this steel, but instead I'm going to forge it down to use it as the cladding, and for my center steel I'm going to be using some leaf spring. So here I'm just going to work it down to about a 1/2 inch thickness, and I'm using 1/2 inch kiss blocks here to get that 1/2 inch thickness. And once I have my full length, I'm going to straighten it back out some more and I will be able to cut out my leaf spring to make it match the two sides that I can cut out from this billet. So this guy right here is a piece of leaf spring that I have lying around. I have leaf spring everywhere, and it comes in all different thicknesses. This one is about ½ inch thick, and I'm just using the bandsaw to cut it to size. I've already put it in the forge and flattened it and annealed it, so the bandsaw does quick work of it, and it helps me cut it pretty accurately. And here we have our 3 pieces. This is the piece of leaf spring that will go in the center, and we have our outside steel, and we're gonna weld it all up together very nicely. Now this billet doesn't need a lot of welding, so all I'm gonna do is tack the ends and put on a holding stick. And as always, I'm gonna spray it with some WD-40 or some kind of hydrocarbon. That way it seeps in there and helps protect the steel from getting any kind of oxidation, to help ensure our forge weld. And before we get into our forge welding, I'd like to thank the sponsors of this challenge. They are companies that are putting out the prices for the viewer portion of this challenge, so definitely go check them out, give them some love, and tell them we sent you from the YouTube Knife Maker Challenge. As well, be sure to check out all the participating channels. That way you can see which one is your favorite and which one you will be voting for. There will be a link in the description down below for you to be able to go and vote for your favorite channel. It should be me. Hopefully it's me, but there are some very awesome entries that are extremely cool, way better than mine. So you should definitely check those out, as well as check out the judges' builds. They got some really cool ones on there as well. So definitely go check out all the channels and check out our sponsors, and I would really appreciate that. Now let's get back to the build. And once we reach forge welding heat, I'm going to hit it with my straightening dies. That way I get full coverage, and then move on to my flattening dies. All I'm doing is just trying to compress it as evenly as I can. That way I get a nice solid forge weld. And from here on, I'm looking to get as much length as I can on this billet. Here I'm using some 1/4 inch kiss blocks, which is going to be the ideal thickness that I want for my knife, or I should say machete, and we're just gonna work it down until we get to that thickness. And for anybody that doesn't know, it was actually during this part of the build where we got hit by Hurricane Milton, so that definitely took some of my time out. But fortunately, thanks to all the first responders and linemen, we actually got our electricity back in record time, so it didn't push me too far back on this build, which I'm very grateful for, or else I probably wouldn't have been able to finish. I always start these builds way too late, and I'm always struggling towards the end. So here I'm going to be doing something I haven't done before, and I'm actually cutting out my spaces between the handle and the actual blade. I do wish I didn't get impatient and cut both at the same time, because it kind of made it difficult to work around, but I managed to do it somehow. In the future, I would definitely cut the handle portion off first and then move on to doing the blade portion afterwards. So now that I've worked the handle down a little bit, I'm gonna press it down to the 1/4 that I wanted, and I'll give it some length and some width. So for this machete, I actually want it to be thinner towards the bottom, towards the handle, and be thicker or wider towards the tip. Why? No particular reason. As well as this machete is not going to have a tip, I'm going to have a little, it's going to be flat towards the front. That's what I'm looking for. There's no particular reason why I did it this way. I just thought it looked cool, so I went this route. It still looks pretty cool, but in hindsight, I should have made it thinner and worked it out more. But as I said prior, I was definitely running out of time, so I stuck with this thickness, which made it a little bit heavier. But I mean, that weight really helps, you know, do apocalypse stuff like, you know, cutting down thicker branches and stuff like that to start fires. I don't know. It's a little thick. It's okay. So here I'm just touching up that handle, try to get it as close to what I want as possible. And overall, I'm very happy with the way it all turned out. And I definitely want to leave a forged finish on the majority of this knife just because that rough look to it actually makes it, I don't know, it gives it that cool factor that I want it to have. And I don't know about you, but let me know down in the comments, do you like clean, fully ground knives, or do you like that forced to finish look on the knives? Let me know in the comments down below. So that's basically it for the forging portion of this build. I got everything pretty close to what I wanted, so I'm just touching up some small spots, like specifically in the handle, to make it as comfortable as possible. I'm not the best hand forger around, but it didn't come out too bad if I do say so myself. I didn't have to do very much grinding in terms of actually getting it to a nice comfortable shape. But while I'm doing all this tedious grinding, let me tell you about the other makers. Man, they made some seriously cool projects this time, which is kind of pretty cool because doing these challenges lets them go and be very, very creative and sometimes do builds that they normally wouldn't do. Like me making this machete club thing. I wouldn't normally do that. I'd probably stick to chef's knives and doing all kinds of weird Damascus stuff. But it's always fun for, you know, the creativity to be able to let that creativity flow and do something very, very cool. And I'm mainly speaking for myself, but I'll speak for everybody else too. I'm pretty sure that they all look forward to these challenges as much as I do because we get to make these wacky things that we normally wouldn't be spending our time making. Now on to my favorite part of this build. I was able to drill the first hole, and the second and third hole they were not giving in, so I ended up heating up the tank, and I took the liberty to put my maker's mark on it while the tank was nice and hot, and I gave it a couple of cycles to anneal the steel and soften it up so that I could drill through. But I actually did multiple cycles multiple times and I just couldn't do it, so I ended up having to hot punch them with this little punch that I made. I have run into this issue before, but normally it's when I'm using some kind of weird steels in my build. Normally when I do bandsaw blades, I've actually run into it I think twice, where the steel actually hardens and I just can't soften it for the life of me. And since my oven is actually rather small, this knife doesn't fit in there to, you know, soften it that way. So I just have to put it in the forge and let it heat up and slowly cool down, and sometimes it just doesn't do the trick, so sometimes you just gotta force it. And that was pretty much it. Afterwards I went on ahead and heat treated the knife, and I had a nice successful heat treat. Alright guys, so we are out of the timber. It was successful. I had to shim it, but it's looking fairly straight now. This right here, I gotta straighten it out just a tad bit, but I'll do that with my carbide peen hammer. This is softened, so it's not a big deal. And yeah, so far so good. So I'm going to put it in some vinegar to help dissolve all the scale, and should be good to go once I'm back from work. Alright guys, so I have it out of the vinegar, and it's looking pretty good. You can see that the mask is starting to pop through in certain areas where it doesn't have too heavy layers of oil or scale on it, and it's looking very cool. So it's looking very promising. Next thing I'm doing, I'm gonna hit it with a wire wheel and get all this crud off so we get back to nice clean steel. So from this point forward, all I really have to do is do my finished grinding, and I do that with a fresh 60 grit belt, and I work it up to 120 and 240. That way I get a nice and even polish on the knife before I do my hand sanding. Now on this particular knife, I didn't hand sand prior to the handling of the knife, and that was for a particular reason. Here you can actually see the Damascus in there a little bit if you get in that right light. But as I was saying, on this one I didn't hand sand prior to doing my handle, and that was for two reasons. Reason number one, because I'm actually gonna etch this knife with the handle on. That way I can have the spine of the knife nicely etched on there. And reason number two is because this was actually rather late at night, so I wanted to do my glue up, that way it would glue overnight. Because the glue I use has about a 7 to 10 hour dry time, and I would rather that be during the nighttime while I'm asleep than during the day, and keeps me from being able to work on it further. Especially since this was probably like Monday morning, I think, or so. So I definitely was trying to get it done, so I had enough time to edit out this video for our release on Saturday. But that wasn't too much of a biggie, since I was able to go on ahead and glue it up prior to hand sanding, and I just hand sanded it afterwards, since I only have a small portion of the blade that I actually have to hand sand, since the rest of it is a forced to finish look on it. So here's something that I don't normally do on my knives, because I do a lot of holes, but this guy was not drilling, so I didn't even bother. And what I'm doing here is I'm making a channel for the epoxy to go on and fill. That way it has more surface area to grab on, and hopefully gives us a better seal and a better grab onto the actual handle material. Now my pin holes and my pins on the wood are the right size, but the holes in the actual knife handle are a little bit bigger. But I made sure to do the holes in a way where it would actually, bind to one side and bind to the other. That way this knife holds nice and solid while it glues up. And while I'm gluing up, I'd like to ask you guys to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this video, if you like these kinds of videos and they bring some kind of value, or you just enjoy them for entertainment. I definitely appreciate that. And I'd like to tell you guys about a new channel I started, which is called JP's Bladeworks ASMR, where I do a different style of editing on these videos, and I do no commentary, no talking, basically. That way it can appeal to a bigger audience around the world that doesn't speak English. And I would really appreciate it if you guys help me out with this, and I will have in the pinned comment down below that channel, so you can go and subscribe and watch the videos, and that would really help the algorithm get some information and start showing those videos to an audience that actually wants to see it. So if you could do me that favor, I would really appreciate it, and thank you guys for your support on this channel and on that other one. So now that our handle is glued on, all I have to do is grind it to shape, and we're basically 99% done with this knife, which actually went a lot quicker than I anticipated. But I'm very happy with that end result and the way it looks and feels after all the grinding. And in all honesty, I have no idea what kind of wood I'm using here. I was gonna state that earlier, but I forgot. This is just a random wood I've had for years in my cabinet, and I figured it's now or never, so I decided to use it for this knife. And the wood is actually very pretty. I'm not sure what kind of wood it is, but if you know your wood and you know what kind of wood it is, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. So you guys know, I read pretty much and I reply to pretty much every comment. So definitely, if you know what kind of wood this is by the end of the video, let me know, because I personally want to know. I have tons of like blocks of wood I get from a supplier nearby, and he basically tells me what they are, but they're not labeled. So I got this piece of wood probably like 2 or 3 years ago, and I have no idea what it is. So I would definitely like to know. And it's a very, very pretty wood, but it's definitely not a stabilized wood, so that's why I like to use it on these kinds of builds. And as always, my little trick, I like to hit it with the orbital sander because I am working with wood, and this helps blend in all the different lines and shapes and stuff. And so finally we go on to hand sanding our knife. This knife was actually very, very long, so it took a while to hand sand. And here I'm doing something that I don't normally show, but it's definitely something I do, and I've been called out on it on comments before, that how come I'm putting the raw wood into the acid, that it's gonna not be good for my knife. So pretty much the trick to it is, when I'm doing a handle like this where I want the Damascus to pop out all the way on the spine and around the handle, I use a G10 liner. In this case I use the black liner, and then I use it to be able to give me some leeway to tape around. So I tape around the whole handle, and I go over it with clear nail polish. Now what this nail polish does is, once it dries, which I'm using a quick dry nail polish, once it dries, it actually protects the wood and keeps the wood from absorbing any of that moisture, any of the acid or the coffee. Because I have tried it without it on scrap pieces, and it definitely absorbs it, and it changes the color of the handle material, or it makes it smell like coffee. So by doing this, it protects the handle material and allows me to etch all the way around the knife and get the desired result that I want. And now that the knife is finished, all I have to do is put a nice sharp edge on it. In this case, I'm using a 220 grip belt on my belt sander, set to about 20% of the belt grinder speed, and I'm alternating sides until I get the desired burr that I want on my knife. Afterwards, I take it to a strop, which I don't show here, and I remove that burr, and I get a nice, clean, solid, sharp edge. And in the spirit of Halloween, let's destroy some pumpkins. And as you can see, I am a knife maker before I am an editor. So one day I'll have a, cool editor that can make all cool kinds of shots and stuff. But for now, enjoy the shots of the knife. I really like the Damascus. It has like this like grainy pattern to it, which I really, really like. And I like the forge finish that it has on the entirety of the knife. Be sure to go down in the description down below and vote, and check out the new channel that I made, and hopefully go and support it. Thank you guys very much. I greatly appreciate y'all, and I will catch y'all on the next one. Peace.